How are you?
Hey, nice to meet you.
Yeah, I'm glad to have this interview with you because I already read what you have done in your life, but I like to ask you if you can have a little introduction of yourself.
Sure. So can sort of go backwards. So today, I'm a writer and startup investor. So I spend half my day working on writing projects, the other half investing in very early stage startups. I wrote a book that came out a few years ago called The Creative Curve, which is a look at the question of can we learn how to become more creative. And I've been doing startup investing in various forms for about a decade. Before that, I ran for 6.5 years a venture-backed company that was in the marketing analytics software as a service space. We raised $22 million in VC. At our peak, we had like 100 plus people, and learned a lot of good lessons through sort of ups and downs and everything in between. And I live in New York. I have a very silly dog who might show up at some point. And yeah, that's the background.
Okay, thank you. So I prepared many questions, both on the entrepreneurial side of your life, and on the other hand, I prepared also some questions about creativity more in general. So I'd like to start up by asking, as an entrepreneur, is there a point that many startuppers know they are missing? In your personal experience, can you find some main errors that you made in the past?
Oh yeah, I mean, tons of errors. I think the biggest one is in my personal life, I'm pretty conflict avoidant. So I don't like getting in fights with people. I don't like creating conflict. And when you're a CEO, you have a lot of conflict you have to create, and that constructive conflict and constructive tension. But it took me a while to learn that and learn how to become comfortable with that idea, and maybe also separating my sort of professional need to sort of create conflict and tension with the fact that on a personal level, I don't enjoy it. And those two things can be separate skills.
Yeah. Now, I like to talk a bit about your book because I found very interesting the topic that you described in the book. And so I wanted to ask, in the creative process, you have a scientific approach to creativity. But when you were a child, what was your relationship with it? I mean, were you a creative child, or did you start training your creativity by growing up? Like in your book, you say that creativity can be trained. Did you start to train creativity growing older, or you were a creative child since the beginning?
One of the things I think is that my definition of creativity is sort of changed and enlarged over time. Now I sort of recognize and realize that creativity isn't just sort of traditional art, but it's also entrepreneurship, it's problem solving. There's a much broader world of creativity than I think maybe what we're taught in school. And so as a kid, I was, definitely there was phases where I was doing very creative things, but I wasn't necessarily aware that they were creative sort of with a capital C. And so over the years, I've sort of realized and looked back at what I've done and realized, a lot of things I did were creative. And that's actually empowered me to now, look at fields that I've never done before and maybe feel a lot more intimidating and pursue them because I know that it's something you can learn and something you can nurture and something you can actually get better at.
And also related to this changing of your proper definition of creativity over time, how would the child Allen react to the current Allen, and also vice versa? What would you like? What would you tell to the child Allen starting growing older?
Yeah, I think the younger version of me would be sort of surprised that I sort of pursued a career that's very focused on, nowadays, it's very individual. Like I don't have a large team. I invest by myself. I write, which is sort of a more solitude-ish, I don't know if that's the right word, activity, although there's a lot of people involved sort of behind the scenes that people don't really sometimes realize. So I think that would be sort of surprising because I think as a kid, I always thought I wanted to run large organizations and large teams. And turns out I actually really like having a lot of solitude and working sort of by myself, even though I'm very much a people person. I think that's actually almost more of my personal life. And then I think looking back, the thing I would sort of tell younger me was like to look at my like motivations, closely and understand what drove me to do certain things. I think I was pretty insecure when I was younger, and I still am. And I think that drove me to sort of maybe be an overachiever in certain dimensions that I don't know if if those were the right decisions looking back. Like, I think I could have been a bit calmer in certain things and it would have all been fine.
Okay. I would like also to ask you, in your book, you interviewed many people. Is there a creativity anecdote that intrigued you the most while you were interviewing all these people, entering in contact with different realities and experiences? Or maybe just a creativity anecdote that you discovered while just thinking on your own, something curious that intrigued you while you were...
Can you repeat the question? I didn't quite get it. I'm sorry.
Yeah. So if there's some creativity story anecdote like that triggered your curiosity that you recall with pleasure, like, oh, I didn't know that. That's cool.
Yeah. I mean, one of the things I was really fascinated by was I interviewed a man named David Rubenstein, who's pretty well known in the States. He's the co-founder of Carlyle Group, which is one of the largest private equity firms. He's sort of considered one of the grandfathers of private equity, and everyone sort of views him as this sort of titan. And what's interesting is this man's a billionaire, and I interviewed him over tea for the book. And what I thought was so interesting was midway through the interview, he started trying to ask me all these questions about data and analytics. And I realized in that moment, I was like, oh, the reason why he's had such a long and illustrious career is that he's never stopped being curious. And so that really stuck with me, this idea of even this guy who's in his 60s, he's a billionaire, he's totally made it, he's still learning, he's still curious. And that really, I think, just set for me this idea of, wow, like, if this is something we care about, we have to be pretty serious about keeping our curiosity as we get older.
That's cool. In fact, I'd also love to not stop being curious, because in my personal experience, I'm afraid of stop being curious when I get old. Yeah. So I'd love to still being curious. So now that I'd like to ask you something more personal, some way. I want to ask you, what is your relationship with art and the art world in general? Because did it ever happen to you that, for instance, any artificial work, may it be a painting, a song, or a whole musical, because you interviewed also the creator of the Avoidance, and so I guess you have a strong relationship with art in general. Did any artificial work change your perception about the world in general? Do you think that humans' creativity is able to impact other mind radically?
Yeah, so I think that one of the things that people get confused about with creativity is they often confuse it with productivity. So they often confuse creativity with doing something. So, you painted a painting and no one ever saw it, and people think that's being creative. I reject that idea completely. I think creativity is all about the social phenomenon. So I don't think you can remove the idea of the relationship with the audience from creativity. When you talk to really successful artists, they're very clued into this idea that they're trying to create an emotion, a feeling, some sort of experience for the audience. And so as a result, when I think about art within the context, not just of the skill of the craft, but within the sort of social context and the narrative that it was created within. And that, I think, is actually very eye-opening, because it really changes your definition of art. And you start to understand why, some of this absurdist art, I don't know if you remember from Art Basel last year, but someone took an actual banana and they duct taped it to the wall. No. And, they were like, well, is this art? And yeah, it clearly was art. It was making a commentary on Art Basel and the sort of modern art movement. And, it was definitely art, in the same way that Andy Warhol was screen printing, and it was definitely art, even though a lot of that art he never touched with his own hands. He had, commercial screen printers printing some of that. And so, our view of art, I think, has often been unfairly intertwined with the idea of craft, and craft and art are very different, because you could craft a perfect replica of the Mona Lisa, and that could make you very technically skilled, but it doesn't make you an artist. And so I think that separation is very useful and actually very empowering for thinking about what can fit within the definition of the creative arts.
Yeah. So you also, in what you said, I guess that you find also this difference between the concept of maybe intellectual or just executioner and artist. So that.
Totally. Yeah. And often, I mean, you look at folks like Jeffrey Koons, right, who has like legions of assistants and people assisting him. You know, is he not an artist? I mean, there's definitely people who argue that, but I think it's a foolish argument.
Yeah.
Because I mean, Michelangelo had a workshop, right? He had assistants, and we definitely think Michelangelo is an artist, right? Even though he didn't paint every single square inch of his masterpieces.
Oh, true. Yeah. I never thought about this like in this way, but I like this way. I totally agree. So now I'd like to ask, you do many different things in your life, but if you have to suddenly change your life, what you're doing, what would you do? I mean, where would you focus on your life if tomorrow you'd like to change or stop being an entrepreneur, for instance?
Yeah, I mean, I did this recently, so I feel like I wouldn't want to make another change, but I made a jump maybe a year ago from being, an entrepreneur to being a full-time author / investor. And so that was a pretty big jump, just this idea of going from sort of managing people to sort of more of a solitary career, a solo career, maybe that's the term. And so that jump, I think, was sort of the big jump I would make. And so far it's been the right jump. I've been really happy and really enjoying it and find it, I think I really, really love autonomy. And so I really love the ability to sort of like have autonomy within my day, within my hours, within my weeks, what pace I want to do things at. I have a lot of control over that. For me, that's sort of the most important thing.
Okay. Now, I'm over with my questions, but I have just a tiny one to conclude the interview. So I would like to ask you if you have any particular habit that, in your opinion, anyone should have, like that you suggest anyone to develop.
Yeah, I mean, I think
in general of your career. Sorry.
I think the biggest thing would be to it's sort of two-part answer. I would sort of resist getting too into the mental framework around mentors. I think the idea of mentorship is overly formal. And the way I would sort of reframe it to people is I think you want to generally, in your professional life, I think you want to be friends with the people you work with and people in your industry. And I think you want to be friends with people who are older than you. I think a lot of young people really struggle with this idea of sort of having intergenerational friends. I think for whatever reason, it seems like, I can't be friends with someone who's 55 or 60. And I found some of my deepest and best friendships are people substantially older than me. And those friendships, there's also definitely an element of sort of wisdom giving that sort of comes with those. But I think more than anything, or more importantly, at the end of the day, they're a friendship. And so I generally try and push young people to sort of reframe how they think about that and try to, like, the word mentor just feels very formal for what is a pretty emotionally, in an ideal scenario, pretty emotionally involved relationship.
Yeah. Yeah, in fact, that's true. And one of the things I like about the Aurora Fellows program is that they don't have the mentor definition, but it's like you have a wizard that you can call or text to like share opinions. So that's true.
Totally. And it's just like a lot of times in life, we overly formalize things. Like the term networking, for example, is very formal. It's like, I just call it going to a party, so I think we sometimes can make things too structured in our head.
Yeah, you're right. So I'd like to thank you for this interview. I'm over with the question. I may just ask you if you have other curiosity. I don't know if you want to ask something, but that's it because...
Cool. Great. No, this is great. Thank you so much for having me. I appreciate it. And good luck with the rest of the fellowship.
Thank you.
Cool.
It's been a pleasure. Bye.